Sir Richard John Roberts, thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome.
To begin on a lighter note, can you share fun memory, your story from the very day that you got chemistry set when you were 11? How did that experience lead your curiosity into science?
Well, I was lucky because in those days, when you bought a chemistry set, there were a lot of very interesting compounds in them. And I learned how to make fireworks. I learned how to make explosives. These were not in the instructions for the chemistry set, but I went to the library and read what I could do and discovered I could do this. And, you know, fireworks, explosives, they're good. I like them. And so that really got me hooked on chemistry. And then I followed through with chemistry, went to university in order to study chemistry. And I got all the results I needed for my PhD in 1 year. But in England, you've got to do 3 years. And so I used to go to the library and I did a lot of reading and I discovered a subject called molecular biology. And I read a book by John Kendrew, who was a Nobel Prize winning molecular biologist. He was the first person to discover how to solve the structure of proteins. And his book described what it was like during the early days of molecular biology. And it sounded great. And by the time I finished that book, I knew this was what I wanted to do with my life. So I applied for postdoctoral positions at 6 different laboratories. Only one accepted me. This was a man at Wisconsin, Jack Strominger. And just before I was scheduled to go, he wrote and said, well, you know, could you delay for a month because I'm moving to Harvard? And he'd just been appointed a full professor at Harvard. And so I ended up at Harvard by luck and had a great time there.
I'm sure not by luck, but it seems you have very focused direction from your interest, from your childhood interest.
Well, I read a lot. I like to read around subjects and things that I don't know a lot about. And I always feel if you find something that looks more interesting than what you're doing at the moment, then switch. Go and do the other stuff, do the new stuff. So
it means you never being afraid of experiments, taking risk?
I'm not a worrier. Risks are good. I like risk.
Your Nobel Prize winning research is on gene split and gene splicing.
It's basically showing that genes in eukaryotic cells, in higher organisms like you and I, they're different. They're arranged differently than those in bacteria. So in bacteria, a gene is just a continuous piece of DNA. It's as though I'd made a movie and just shot the whole thing. In eukaryotes, genes are split into pieces. So you've got a big piece of DNA and a little bit of the gene is here and a bit here, a bit here. And you have to cut and splice them in much the way when you make a movie, you cut and splice all the scenes so that it looks as though it's a continuous piece of action. This is what you do with DNA in eukaryotic cells. You make mRNA that copies all of the DNA and then you cut and splice that messenger RNA to make a small messenger RNA that encodes the protein.
So it must have profound impact on understanding of genetics.
Totally.
Can you explain in simple terms what's the contribution of your research for scientific community and for global population?
Well, I think, you know, you probably know about this project to sequence the human genome, which took place many years ago. That sequence, you could not have interpreted it. You could not have understood what it meant if you didn't know about my discovery. Because the human genome is huge and the genes are in pieces all the way through it. And you have to know about this, the fact that they're in pieces, and then you can look for those pieces when you're doing analysis of the sequence. And so almost any time you want to study anything about higher organisms, plants, people, mammals, birds, fish, any of these, their genomes are all arranged in this same way. The genes are split up into little pieces. And so you can't hope to understand all of this at the molecular level, from a molecular biology point of view, if you didn't know about my discovery.
Is it like discovery of the essence of life or the core of living from your research?
I wouldn't quite go that far, but you know, the structure of DNA was considered a very important discovery. Okay? As soon as we discovered that DNA was a genetic material, and then we discovered how it was laid out, and we discovered it was a double helix, you could separate the strands, and this explained replication. my discovery of split genes really was the next step in that. It's probably one of the most important discoveries in figuring out how to interpret this sequence, how to interpret this double helix.
Currently, the whole world has discussed a lot how the world is coping with global aging population. So how has your scientific research can help?
What you're talking about is really something that demands not just knowing about my discovery, but it demands knowing about everybody's discoveries. The whole scientific community produces information that enables you to understand how humans age, how humans reproduce, how plants age, what we need to do in order to improve plants, and so on. So it's the nature of basic research that if you then want to use it to understand how people work, how plants work, how fish, you need to know all about the basics. And then other people can go on and use that basic knowledge in order to improve things. So for instance, one of the things that I do is I've been organizing the Nobel Laureates in favor of genetically modified organisms. If you look at the plant breeding that has taken place in the developed world, you've got big agricultural companies spend huge amounts of money trying to improve crops. And they use methods that are very old-fashioned, not very good. There are much better, newer methods that have been developed in the last 40 years that will do a much better job. But organizations like Greenpeace have come out and tried to claim these are dangerous. They're not. There's just no evidence that they're dangerous. But with these, we could do what has been done in the West, in the developed world. We could do it for the developing world. Do it cheaply, make it available. Just need to get governments to agree that there is no harm from this, that they're not dangerous in the way that Greenpeace is trying to say that they're dangerous. And not only can it mean that there will be more food available, but this can help to alleviate poverty, because an awful lot of farmers are the poorest individuals around. They find it hard to make money. But if they could grow double the quantity of grain or double the quantity of produce from their plants on the same piece of land, provides profit, provides income for them. And so I think it can help draw them out of poverty.
You are in Thailand. You are invited to be keynote speaker in Thailand on Japan-ASEAN BRIDGES series. What's the key message in your keynote address?
Well, I think, what I like to say is that when you make discoveries, you should look for ways that you can commercialize them if it's possible. Okay, don't try and commercialize them if it's not possible, but if it is possible, look for ways to commercialize them. And that's what happened in my case. And so I will tell my personal story of how I got involved with the company in setting it up in the first place, the company that I now work for. I don't own it. I helped them get started in the first place, but I tried to get the lab I was working in to do it, and they weren't interested. And so maybe the researchers, when they make discoveries, need to find better ways of talking to politicians, of talking to the heads of their universities, of talking to the general public, so that if there are commercial possibilities, then they should be followed and they should be exploited.
Do you mean you want to enlighten scientific community or young scientists in Thailand that they should have their skill in commercial interests as well, not just only in the lab?
What I usually tell young people is don't listen too hard to old people, because old people have ideas that maybe are not correct. As you get older, you get very dogmatic, you think you know everything, you think you're smarter than the young people. I disagree. I think the young people are the smart people, and the old people need to listen to them and let them make the discoveries, let them do what they're able to do. We shouldn't think that we should try and control them. And this is a problem in Asia. Mothers always feel that they should be controlling their children. They shouldn't. The children should rebel and tell their mothers to get out of the way.
In Thailand, in terms of education, the government or different stakeholders talk a lot that Thailand should advocate more on STEM education.
Yes.
What do you like to tell public sector or especially young aspiring Thai students?
Yeah. Well, I think STEM education is really good because we live in a society where you can already see what science has done for you. You know, we produce vaccines for COVID very quickly, in a year. Never been done before. No one's ever produced a vaccine this quickly. Why was it done? Because of biotechnology, because science made it possible. Everybody has a cell phone. You have a cell phone. You all have cell phones. Where do you think these came from? These came from science. Science made it possible to develop cell phones. Aeroplanes. You look around you, everything, this camera over there, this came as a result of science. Science is great. Science can do wonders for this world. And I will say one thing, scientists can disagree violently about all sorts of things, but we don't need to find it necessary to shoot the other scientists to make our point. Okay? Scientists are very peaceful people. They love peace. This is what we want. We want peace. And scientists are good diplomats too.
In this current age, people must be worried with advancement of AI, new technology, the digital age,
Yes.
even though you say that science is integrated into people's life. But what's your thought, what's your view about AI advancement?
Yeah, well, AI can be really good and it can be bad. Okay? And, you know, Nobel made his discovery of dynamite. Dynamite is something you can use for good. You can knock out mountains, you can make tunnels through mountains, you can make changes in the land, or you can give it to the army and they'll kill one another with it. And so everything that we do in science and discovery always has the opportunity to be good or to be bad. And AI falls very much into that category, I think. And one of the problems at the moment is it's not being regulated properly. And also, if you want to really use it for good in science, you've got to make sure that there is good data that it's working on. So, you know, if you look at ChatGPT, I call it cheat GPT, it uses nonsense. You know, it goes to all the rubbish that you find on the internet. Social media has been using these kinds of generative AI programs in order to make sure that as soon as you say you like something, you see more of it. Just keeps coming over. That's not the way to teach people. You know, to teach people, you need to see both sides of the story. ChatGPT and AI doesn't do that at the moment. So I think we have to be sure that we regulate it clearly and we make sure that it can be used for good, because it can be used for good. It can do wonders for science. But you have to make sure that the stuff it's using, the database upon which it's operating, is solid. You've got to know that it's factual, it's true. You don't want to have a lot of rubbish in the database that AI is working on.
So, what's your recommendation for human to maintain imagination or curiosity, like what you have done all your life in this age of generative AI, social media, in which it have so much influence on our thoughts?
Right. Well, so I avoid social media. I don't have anything to do with it because
Really?
I don't think it's good.
No Facebook, no TikTok, no IG?
No, nothing. I don't like social media. I think social media is dangerous. And you only have to look at the effect it's having in terms of dividing societies. You know, you get people who only see one side of a story. They see it so often they believe it. They never see the other side. They never think clearly about whether what they believe is true or whether it's not. So I don't like that very much, and I don't want to get involved with it. What I do like is curiosity. I like creativity. I like people, and kids usually are creative and they're curious. We shouldn't knock that out of them, and we tend to do that in schools. You know, we have a forced curriculum. They've got to learn this, and they've got to pass exams and so on. I'm not sure that's the best way always to educate children. But as they get older, we want to make sure they don't get polluted by social media.
But how do you maintain curiosity or ignite your curiosity or discovery?
Well, you reward it, okay? If people are truly curious, you make sure that they have the opportunity to use that curiosity, to explore it, to find out what's going on. You don't try and knock it out of them and say, hey, stop asking those questions. You encourage them to ask more questions.
I just don't want to mention your age because I cannot believe it myself because you are 80, but you are still very young, very vibrant, very active in your thoughts.
I like to
How do
think
you
so.
take care of yourself?
I don't worry. I do no exercise. I make sure my mind is nice and active. I don't eat too much. I enjoy life. I don't think I've worked a day in my life. What I do, I love what I do. Absolutely love it. So that's how I keep going.
Sir Richard Roberts, thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome.
ขอบคุณค่ะ thank you
Oh, okay.